Welcome, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Digitizing Lean, Empower Your Workers with Digital Tools to Make Lean Work. My name is Megan, and I'll be the moderator today. I'm excited today to introduce you to our main speakers. Pablo Tosta has spent over 15 years in the manufacturing industry and the last 6 years helping companies successfully embrace digital and cultural transformation by adopting digital tools and human-centric apps to improve their business outcomes and achieve their business objectives. Sanjay Rajan leads industry solutions here at Tulip and has over 20 years of experience in MES, product lifecycle management, machine learning, and business development in manufacturing. Take it away.
Thanks, Megan, and welcome all. Hope to have a really interactive session today. Pablo and I will take you through some of our thoughts and our journey experiences through kind of manufacturing and lean in particular. Today we'll just get going with kind of what's the relevance of lean in today's manufacturing, right? And then go to what does it mean to digitize lean? Just talk through that a bit, and then most importantly, how do we implement digital lean once we define it? What are some of the challenges? What are the barriers? And how are people doing it? Pablo and I have had the pleasure of working through some of this with our customers in the last couple of years. Pablo will share some of his experiences, and let's talk about those case studies, and then end it off with questions and answers, and hopefully, again, like we have a good interactive session today. Right. So the first thing, let's get the definition out of the way, right? Everybody here is here because they've heard of lean, they have practiced lean, they are champions of lean. And for the sake of this webinar, we'll stick to the same definition. It's really, lean is still focused on getting a lot of value to customers, putting customers first, while reducing waste, which then translates to better margin, better throughput and productivity, right? But one of the big things for all of us in manufacturing is that we've realized that our customers' values are changing, in the sense that it's not just best quality, lowest price anymore, right? It's also environment. So as we think of lean, we'll stick to the shop floor definition of it, but let's keep lean and green in mind as we kind of go forward with that, right? So first, let's start with kind of, why is lean still relevant, and what's the market needs for lean still are in terms of its potential, right? While lean is still very relevant, most of us can agree that it's become quite stagnant on the manufacturing shop floor. Pablo and I visit a lot of shop floors, and we see that outside of all that automotive influence from a couple of decades ago, the shop floor themselves have stagnated in the way they are implementing lean, right? It's relegated in many cases to a couple of still good lean thinkers, who walk you around the shop floor and talk about lean, and they know what they are talking about. But in terms of the tools, systems, the paper, the Excel spreadsheets, a lot of that hasn't been practiced for too long, right? And hopefully many of you agree to that. While we still rely on those pretty much manual systems here with definite lean thinking, a couple of things have happened to us, right, in the last 5-6 years that are the elephant in the room. One is kind of the whole mass personalization, which means customers, whether they are industrial customers buying industrial products or end consumers buying electronic goods, customers really know what they want, and this has introduced personalizing, which has then introduced a lot of variability in production, right? As a manufacturer, now you need to make 3 green things, then 2 blue things, and then 2 purple things, right? This is great. It's fueled demand, but there's a lot of frustration in how to make capacity flexible and how to reduce waste in the light of all this variability that you have to deal with. And one of the things that manufacturers are doing is starting to move to one-piece flow, right? Borrowing from automotive to kind of support this need. And in the pre-pandemic time, what was really hot was, how do you transform your manufacturing, right? Industry 4.0, digital transformation. Let's automate this, right? Let's take the surging demand and throw automation into it. And that really was the buzz. And it's really very clear that few, if at all, any manufacturers have successfully done Industry 4.0, right? And anybody who has tried to automate their way out of the problem with robotic arms and IoT platforms have seen very mixed success, and are starting to get jaded about that terminology, right? Right when that was happening is when the pandemic hit, right? What happened? I mean, at a high level, the first thing that happened was supply chains broke, and then actually healed quite a bit to an extent, where pretty fast, where manufacturing then got back their bearing. And what did manufacturers do? They increased their working capital. They started pre-buying inventory, stocking the inventory so that they would try to buffer for all of that supply chain problems. And then right when that was starting to heal is when the great resignation hit, right? And for those who, and many of you would be familiar with the term, it's the human impact on manufacturing, where there is in a significant amount, manufacturing was affected by people who retired, people who stayed home, and that impacted the shop floor. And it became the single most common problem for every manufacturer, right? The labor shortage becoming an issue. We are starting to see that the signs of people coming back to work, but a lot of that is still temporary workers, right? And so we'll talk about how that is impacting lean thinking and how that's making lean more relevant again today, right? Um, the second part of it is that there's a generational shift, right? The expectation of the younger workforce is definitely different than folks like me when I was in manufacturing. It starts with like what's physically expected of them to get their job done, right? And not to speak of software, right? And while all of that is there, study after study continues to show that humans continue to be the number one source of errors, right? It's the mistakes or the lack of training or this temporary workforce that would lead to waste, delays, loss of margin, and things like that, right? So with that in mind, with kind of where we were before the pandemic and where we are now, uh, in this webinar, we want to revisit lean, start thinking about how to make it relevant again, especially in the context of getting this new workforce onboarded quickly, getting the job done, empowering them with fresh ideas, and continuing to get product out to your customers, right? So with that, I think keeping that in mind, I'm going to ask Pablo to kind of start sharing. Pablo, you've been on the shop floor a lot. You've implemented lean. You've seen things happen. How do you see the current situation? What's your perspective on this, if you will?
Yep. I think it's important to highlight the last point there, which is the skills gap, right? And if we cover a bit around what are the 8 wastes of lean, you have transportation or the costs of weights, right? The wastes, right? Inventory, motion, waiting time, overproduction, overprocessing, and defects, and then also unutilized talent. If we focus on that very last one, when it comes to unutilized talent, is the core of the problems that are actually arising that are related to all of the other wastes, right? So if you have people that are not being utilized efficiently and are not trained, you're going to get the consequences paid in all of the other 7 wastes, right? Because if people are not trained, they don't know what to do, they don't know how to manage their process related to inventory, or they don't know how to calculate the time where a shipment comes in versus what's your just-in-time process. If they don't know, if you don't have a good process, whether where people are trained or to calculate utilization or for planning or for scheduling, then it's because you don't have trained and skilled people, right? And they're not being utilized in the right places, right? If, for lack of a better word, right? I don't know if
Pablo, we
Sanjay can
also
add something to that, but yeah.
Yeah, I was just saying that it's, and I know you and I have talked about this. I mean, these wastes, while they are categorized neatly, you can't pull at one of them without pulling at the other, right? I mean, defects. cause things to wait, and then defects cause inventory issues. Defect cause things to be underproduced or overproduced, right? So some of the challenges here really are when you have skilled workers who've been doing their job for multiple years, right, a decade or something like that. They self-optimize, right? Those folks understand what they need to do, and they self-optimize, and they in a sense have built lean thinking into their work. But when you have a lot of temporary workers coming in, when people who haven't done their jobs at all before, and they're really evaluating if this is a good place to work, do I want to work here for the rest of my life? When they are in that mode, it's just they become the focus, right? How quickly they adopt and how quickly they kind of start thinking about their job starts to impact kind of productivity. So it is an interesting time we live with the workforce being highly volatile today, right?
Yeah, and we're going to touch on that specific point a little bit later, because I think it's pivotal to this very topic about lean and digital transformation of lean.
So what does digitizing lean actually mean, and how do we go about doing it? So let's talk about that a little bit here. Kind of the next two slides are really just a study, right? And it's one of many studies that are done by analysts and by the industry groups and things like that. And I just pick one, and I don't mean to pick one to be picky. I just wanted to kind of say where these studies were and where people's head is at when they look at lean versus what's going on right now, right? So in this study, for example, and you can see the link at the bottom, it's right. I mean, it makes sense when you see this, which says that a typical lean implementation or adoption of lean thinking can have a 15% reduction in operational cost. Makes perfect sense. You add digitization to it, it could do 100% improvement, which means you kind of get an overall 30% cost reduction. But not to pick on the study, but I think the part of the problem is that when you look at studies like this and say, okay, what does it mean to go digital lean? Great, that's fantastic. I get 100% improvement. Give me that digital lean. And immediately you'll find that the levers that they mention for improvement start with IIoT, industrial IoT, robots, big data, things like that, right? And I've been there in my past. I worked for a very, very large company that did a lot of MES implementations. And that's what we did. We went in there and did digital transformation. And we started by large platforms and automation and robots. And you know what? The problem was that not everybody could afford it. Not everybody actually even wanted it. And we had very little success, right? And this is not the fault of the technology. It's not the fault of anything else, except that it is extremely complex to adopt digital lean by starting with platforms and robots and automation, right? So all this buzz around how Industry 4.0 will transform your business is absolutely true. It will transform it, but it's not a transformation for everybody, right? The barriers to entry are very, very high. So what do we do that? What do we do, right? The study kind of goes on to kind of, and not just the study, but just multiple studies says, they break down kind of where all the benefits of lean thinking are. And who can argue, right? I mean, it's labor productivity, it's output, right? I mean, production time reduction and things like that, right? But the most important part here is what struck me in these kind of studies is that they kind of take digital lean, digital tools and lean thinking as two separate things and really try to combine them with very expensive implementations, right? So the rest of this webinar is really about getting all of you to think about simpler starting points, right? How can you have those same benefits or start reaping the same benefits across all of these dimensions of inventory and productivity and logistics and output? But how do you do that in a way that you can actually start smaller, start agile, and digitize? But where are the areas that we digitize? And how can this be afforded by everybody, where everybody can participate in it, learn from it, and have that improvement, right? So before we get into those case studies and start looking at some real examples of how we do it, one of the things that we find, and again, this is as a software vendor now, putting on my hat as a software vendor, is we definitely find that there are certain barriers to how people think about adopting software in general, right? And my my guess on this is, after talking to hundreds of customers, is ERP implementations, for example, over the last 15 years have jaded a lot of people over manufacturing software, right? You say manufacturing software, everybody thinks customization, inflexible, overly complex. I'm pretty sure people are going to hate it. But anyway, show me what you got, right? I mean, that's what you get mostly, right? And lean thinking continues to be kind of the domain of one or two experts. And unfortunately, most the lean thinkers don't have budgets because they are in one corner of the shop floor, right? And like I said earlier, the skilled workers who figured out how to run their stations lean are starting to leave the workplace, right? So the barrier then becomes thinking, okay, we have our own lean system, it's very manual, we've been using it for a long time, but we're not going to attempt to change it, because given the labor climate and what's happening in manufacturing, that's not something I want to touch, right? So right in the middle of these barriers are these things that we don't want to touch it. We're a little unique. We have put too much money into ERP. Let's try to get that to work for us. And then more recently, if you bookend these middle three barriers, the other two ones are, yeah, I know I hear a lot about the cloud and how simple software can be and things like that, but I'm not ready for it yet. And I've also looked into Industry 4.0, and it's not something for us, right? So somewhere along the way, there is all of this that's going on. And somewhere there is this resistance to adopting this because it seems too complex and too tiring, right? So let's continue this definition of kind of what's digital lean and start talking about practical considerations in implementing and bringing digital into lean. And I'll kind of have Pablo kind of talk through his experiences and what we've been doing in particular in our conversations with our customers the last couple of years. So Pablo, if you want to kind of talk about things that are challenging about lean and what needs to be done about it.
Yeah, and I think somebody brought up a question here, saying, do you have industrial engineers guiding your software development and implementation, or do you have lean thinkers and Lean Six Sigma belt guiding you, right? I think that's a very leading question to what we're going to talk about and what Sanjay mentioned, because I think the lean thinking and lean practice, they go hand in hand, right? And one of the things that I've seen is a good implementation of lean thinking is when everything that you do is with a lean mentality and lean practice, right? So explaining people and giving them tools to actually have lean thinking enabled as part of their day-to-day practice. What that is, okay, an end system, right? It's been very hard to actually, and challenging for some of our customers to deploy an end system. Why? Because you require specific hardware, specific apps, or specific software to be developed in order to create an end system, right? Whether you use something like a Tulip platform where you integrate all that and it's actually part of your app development. And what is happening is that the process owner, the industrial engineer, sees it as an opportunity to actually, rapidly attend or look at an issue in the workstation, right? And also raise the flag and design some sort of escalation process easier, right? Same thing goes with Kanban. Or any other type of inventory management methodology that you have implemented in your shop floor, right? The other thing about this is motion study. What this actually tells us is, well, if my production line has stopped for some reason, right? Now we tied it back to an end system, right? What does that operator need to do, right? As part of their standard operating procedures or the standard work that they know and they day-to-day live it, because you have a standard that has been implemented and they have it at the tip of their hands. Whenever that line stops, they know that they are going to go to maintenance or go to that, right? So how do you actually do a study that tells you a bit better where to relocate people and allocate people to utilize that talent more efficiently. And then the last one I would say, the time studies, right? So typically, you go out with your stopwatch and paper, right, and a clipboard, and you start timing the steps in your process, right? That's a typical way of doing it, and it's been that technology has been around for 200 years now. But with a digital tool, I think a time study comes as part of your implementation of whatever type of app you're deploying in the floor, so that you can collect that data and improve based on the data you're collecting from the process, right?
And Pablo, if I may add, what you just said is very relevant to the question that's asked, right? Do you have industrial engineers guiding you, or do you have lean thinkers? The answer is both in this sense, right? So what Pablo is talking about is getting first your industrial engineers, giving them the tools, giving them the software, giving them kind of technology that allows them to collect data, right? If you have a really good lean thinker, a lean thinker needs data too. They need data coming out of the motion study. They need data coming out of the variability of the process, right? You need basic what do you call as representative data of what that process is, so that you can apply the lean thinking. So I view this giving the power to industrial engineers, not putting stopwatches in their hand and asking them to fill papers out, but have very intuitive ways that you can collect this data. And Pablo is going to talk a lot about it here in the next 20 minutes. So that they're spending more of their time in a room with a lean thinker. Imagine 3 manufacturing engineers sitting with data with a lean thinker. You get so much more done, right? So that's getting the drudgery of all of that data that you need to think lean is part of what we are talking about here, right? So.
Yeah, and then the other part of this is, if you're digitizing your operation, that it comes hand in hand, and we're going to touch base on this a little bit later as well. It comes hand in hand with lean, right? Because why are you digitizing? You're digitizing to add value, right? So if you don't have the value there, right, in that process first, and look at all the wastes that you're eliminating with that process, that's the first step. Then you enable digitization by discovering the value, right? And that's the very first point. So then you can actually, add the other points that we actually are highlighting here, which is, well, identify the right starting point, evaluate people, process, technology, readiness, right? So this point is very important, because you can have the right process, you can have the right people that are engaged with the process, but if they're not ready to adopt the technology, then you're going to fail as well, right? So you have to give them the tools that are at the level of the process, at the level of the people, and at the readiness of the people to adopt that, right? Because then it's going to be another, training procedures and long hours trying to get people to adopt it, because it's not either part of the process, or you didn't assess the situation and they were not ready for that, right? And then when it says secure stakeholder buy-in, right? What does that mean? Right? Conveying how a new tool can add value to their daily job. And that's actually tied to my point before, when I was given the example about Andon, right? So if the person that's performing the job doesn't have the right tools, or it's at the right time to actually raise their hand if they're having issues in their workstation, and they can't click at a button that will actually call the attention of their supervisor or maintenance, and that button is far away from their station, or not part of their screen, or they need to take their gloves off, it's going to fail. They're not going to use it, right? So you have to give them tools that are actually adding value, and it's part of their flow, right? And then the other thing that I think it's important, and it ties to readiness, is the gradual growth of that transformation. And we kind of like are introducing this concept of composable approach and composable growth, right? So little by little adding value that will eventually aggregate into that gradual growth, right? So then we introduce kind of this concept of, okay, well, how do we actually focus on the low-hanging fruits that will add more value with less effort, right? in order to fulfill my needs of the digital lean transformation that I'm introducing, right? And then this actually goes directly with, okay, what are the fails? And then what are the benefits of doing this, right? The benefits of digitizing lean, lean at its core is centered in a human, right? Because one of the things that we've always been focused on since day one at Tulip, since we started, as this concept of a better tool, was how can I augment the human? How can I actually help the human to do their job better, more efficiently by eliminating the wastes, right, around their station, right, in their world, right? So what does that mean? That means standardize the work, but also give room to agility, right? So if you put a work instruction in front of them, they should be able to actually give you input on why a step is blocking them or slowing them down, or even causing more quality defects, right? Because they don't do that, right? Then the other thing, I think it's also improved ROI. With new technology, you can solve problems today that you weren't able to actually solve in the past, and then also gain more benefits around productivity and efficiency, right? And then also, I think it's the base of how do you actually make sure people adopt that new mentality is the scalability portion, right? Because you could be the best company in the world with a lot of lean thinkers, a lot of processes around it, but if you do everything on paper, and if you have point solutions for on, and then a disjointed another silo for implementing Kanban, and then a completely different silo for doing kind of this pick-to-light poka-yoking your workstation for pick and place, then those are going to be siloed point solutions that only the people that are performing the job at that very moment in that very station are going to benefit from, right?
Yeah.
But you're never going to integrate that data, or if you are, then it requires a different process to actually get that data out of that system and then incorporate them or transcribe it to an Excel sheet or database or however you're actually consuming that data, right?
Yeah.
So
Pablo, I want
digitizing
to just
as a whole, I
yeah.
think it helps out with eliminating point solutions and then integrating all that data into one system.
Yeah, I want to definitely bring back the point on industrial engineers and manufacturing engineers, right? I mean, we have been that in manufacturing, Pablo, so maybe we have a bias, but I really want to tap into the frustration on that scalability, right? Which is even printing a label, putting a barcode scanner in, having an and-on. Basic things like that are fundamental to how you want to start thinking lean, but implementation of that has become complex. We need an IoT platform. This is a digital tool. We need to put a big budget in for it, right? We need a system.
And Sanjay, not only the budget and the implementation, you need the expertise, whether
Correct.
it's like in-house automation engineers or a consulting
System
company
integrators.
or a system integrator that
Correct.
is focused and is an SME for that specific technology, right?
And so what happens is, even if you get one station done or one line done, you're exhausted. There is no way to expand it. And that was the world that I lived in, right? Where we were able to do it in a small scale and digitize it in a small scale, but expanding it across the factory and across multiple factories, I challenge. I mean, if there is anybody in the call who has successfully done it, we'd love to hear from you, because you're the minority, right? Absolutely, right.
Yeah, and I personally have lived this. I come from the manufacturing industry, and one of the key things is that you might have lean thinkers, but if they sit in corporate and they keep their ideas and try to like push from the top down and have people implement it, then you lose, right? And industrial engineers are actually doing that on a day-to-day basis. People on the floor are actually collecting data and trying to improve. And when you disconnect those, I would say corporate mandates or more so lean pushes from corporate from what the day-to-day operations is like, then you fail, right, in that implementation, or it takes you 10 years to implement it, and in those 10 years people change, the industry changes, the product changes, and you fall behind, right? And I think the other, the other thing that it enables is actually, full solutions that are actually tied and connected with each other based on separate apps that you can actually focus on different aspects of lean, right? So an Andon system that collects data from the workstation, but that actually is also collecting the time, right? So you're automatically doing a time study, and it could also be collected. Maybe the trigger is you ran out of a certain part, so now you're connecting that to inventory, and maybe to your, you realize that your Kanban system is failing, right? And then you can also start collecting ideas from the operators while you're showing them a work instructions application, and that enables Kaizen or continuous improvement, right? And at the same time, in the same application, you have, as I mentioned before, a Pictolite system that's enabling people from error handling, right? Eliminating errors right from the workstation, right? So you're poka-yoking your workstation. And again, there's also peripheral processes such as the 5S audits, right? We mentioned here, right? That will benefit from digitization, right? And it's all about also eliminating the wasted time that it takes you to transcribe all this data that you're collecting from these different apps into one platform, right?
Yeah, I see what Mujaffar is typing in the chat, and it rings very true with me, right? Which is, you have some innovative thinking to go implement lean. I did it in one department, took 2 years to expand it everywhere else, right? And it's written in like Visual Basic, right? Which means an industrial engineer or a manufacturing engineer rolls up their sleeve and says, I'll get it done, right? Which means they write their own software, they implement it, they spend the nights doing it, right? So it completely becomes very person dependent, and it's very exhausting. And so the whole idea here is, how do we not lose that enthusiasm that industrial engineers and manufacturing engineers and lean thinkers have, and how do you implement it? So this would be a good segue, Pablo, to talk about kind of what is happening today with technology, right? I mean, what is technology available to us? Do we need to go write Visual Basic apps? Do I need to go figure out what printer drivers are to label a printer, right? Unfortunately, we had to do all of that 10 years ago, but not today, right? There are much, much simpler ways, without trying to do Industrial 4.0 and buying robots, on how we can implement digital lean. And
yeah, and I think you mentioned Industry 4.0, digital lean, and all those things that are that I think it's like that where they meet in the middle, because they are still buzzwords, right? But at the end of the day, people are trying to be more efficient in their operations, eliminate all the waste. And how do you do that? Well, automation is a tool, right? But it's not the answer to everything, right? Because it's human-centric, this problem, right? And one of the things that I, like, if we look at this slide, this is an example of a smart workstation where you have things like, you don't see it in the picture here, but you have a vision camera that's actually capturing the movement, or defining where you place your hand, right? You have also edge devices that are helping you connect different external sensors, right? Plug and play sensors directly to the platform to capture data and contextualize that the data that you're giving to the operator while they're executing an application. You have things like a barcode scanner. You have other peripheries like a scale, right? Where you're collecting data, but again, validating against a condition that could be tied to a product, right? In the same application.
And I think that what this is a little illustrative. Actually, the truth is, this is actually a digital workstation in our headquarters here in Tulip. And the only reason I say that is, what folks at Tulip we are, and a lot of us come from the industry, and what we are really trying to do is reimagining and rethinking how technology can be made simple. really just as an exercise, because we just love to think about it, put it in the way of how would a manufacturing engineering today, what are the kind of tools we can give them to rethink lean at a workstation level, line level, and a factory level, right? And what does, putting $150 camera, putting a simple edge device, which is nothing but a Linux box that we make, right? It's affordable. You put a Linux box, you put a $150 camera, and you're doing Industry 4.0. You don't need to say that. You don't need to make a big poster about it. But in reality, you've started that journey already by digitizing. And Pablo, if you want to talk about kind of what at that station, what's the operator experience like, which is the right side, right?
Yeah. So basically, you have all of these tools in the workstation as part of the resources that the operator has and as part of a flow, right? So all the things that you see here, it's not, you throw them at the station and you kind of like hope that they actually use it. All of the things that are actually in the station are part of the workflow. And that's the value add of connecting and having all of those things available, right? So you might want to think about like, okay, well, how do I get there? Well, of course, like it's a phased implementation. It's a phased approach where you actually say, okay, what do they need? What does give me the highest return with the least effort, right? And that's, maybe it's just having the intuitive work instructions in front of them, right? Maybe that could serve the purpose of an experienced operator, but also given how things are today, high turnover of people, maybe you need to have all the steps for new people because you're getting a lot of temps in the shop floor, right?
What better to segue into?
Yeah.
I know you worked with this particular customer a lot over making their process lean. Would be great to just take 5 minutes and talk about a couple of customers who implemented kind of this digital lean thinking without using terms like MES or IoT or Industry 4.0. I don't think that those were part of this project at all, right, Pablo?
No. I mean, we started. This customer wanted to do a lot of things around improving the quality because they were getting a lot of complaints. And the first thing they thought was like, well, we're not sending the right materials, right? So it was a pick and place operation. And they were getting complaints from the end user that there were missing parts whenever the parts arrived in UPS or FedEx. So what we did was basically, all right, let's take a picture at the end of the process, right? And then start collecting data. And then, okay, what if we take a picture and also add the serial number to it, right? So it evolved into this workstation that you see in front of you in the picture, which is basically the operator has the work instructions in front of them. The first step in the operation is to scan the traveler. Scanning the traveler is a barcode that identifies that serial number. Then Tulip goes in, grabs that information for the routing directly from the ERP, and automatically shows the first step in the work instruction. And it only shows what the operator needs to see at that specific time, right? It also part of the operation requires them to pick this little parts from their desk, and that's how you see. If you see the gray area there, there's a yellow light. What that means is pick to light. So reducing errors, or basically poka-yoking the process. And then they also, once they check all the elements, they put it aside, and then they hit print. It prints out the specific label that this final kit goes out with. They put it on the kit, and then they take a picture of the kit with all the components, right? So what that's enabling is now you're collecting data with contextualized data, for lack of a better word, from the ERP, from the operator, and then from an external barcode that you're scanning, and then also from the input that you're giving back to the application where you're collecting the data, right? Then the second thing that's happening is that throughout the process, they're checking all the elements. So they're saying pass, fail, pass, fail. So now you're collecting data that it's actually traceable and auditable. So you're building your history record that is tied to a serial number, right? So at the end of the day, you're constructing your electronic digital history record for that specific component that you're building, right?
So the real key thing in this is the amount of time that it took to set this up digitally, which means the pick to light, the camera, the label printer, that's the easiest part of it, right? So for the industrial engineer, the manufacturing engineer who was helping in this, that's the least. So take the complexity out of the simple things there and have them spend more time on designing the process, right? Not standing there with a system integrator or with some person who knows, the only person who knows how to get the printer to work, right? So it's like flipping the way the time of your skilled people are in the factory floor, right? um,
Yeah, exactly. So it basically it leads to the same, question here, or the same along the same lines of what has been leading this implementation to say, well, you're implementing a digital tool, but with lean thinking, right? And the idea, just to talk a bit about this specific use case, it's also how you actually are standardizing your work that you're doing, right? So standardization comes with optimizing your process, but based on the human, not based on the process, and not coming in with a tool that will rip off the process because the tool is not flexible enough to adapt it to the current process, right? So one of the things that helped here is also with, how do I collect the data that's actually useful, providing the right elements to make sure that I increase the continuous improvement cycle and get the feedback from the operators. But then as a consequence, I know what to expect when I'm running that station.
yeah.
Basically say, I'm running a certain cycle time and I'm expecting this quality, right? So for calculation and utilization of that workstation, you're predicting that by actually providing better tools that are based on the human, not with automation or robot, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know, Sanjay, you were going to add something else there.
No, I was just going to add to that, saying that, look, I mean, kind of the proof point to this really in terms of, are you thinking digital correct? Are you starting small? Are you using technology correct? Really comes down to kind of how quickly can you deploy and realize value, right? I mean, so the way you do a project still doesn't change. I mean, you still have to think about a preliminary strategy of what you want to do, kind of and have the scalable thing in your mind. Once I get this cell done or this line done, in the next 3 months, I want to expand it through the factory, right? So you have to think big and think bold in terms of how you want to get things done. But starting points need to be small, simple, and then deployable, where you can realize kind of value within 3 months, right? I mean, that's
bringing back the composable approach that we spoke earlier, right?
And yeah, I think we're going to talk about that next in here, which is really kind of, and Pablo, if you want to talk through this one, I know you're a big plan, do, act, check kind of
Yeah.
that thinking doesn't go away in this, right? It's still very central
No.
to what we're talking about.
No, because I think talking about the timeline and the lean cycle, which is basically led by continuous improvement. You plan ahead. Okay, where am I starting? Well, what are the low hanging fruits that will actually give me the highest value? Then you execute, right? And then you act on that, right? And the acting basically goes ahead. It's a step ahead from checking, right? Once you act, you implement something, then you check the data. All right, is this actually true? This actually gave me the highest value. Yes, it did. All right, where can we improve to actually make it more standard and deploy it everywhere else, right? So you start small and then keep deploying. And in
the big
parallel, you can
difference
do that. Yep.
Yeah, the big difference, Pablo, I think in how we implement plan, do, act, check is, if only the lean thinker is adopting that and not the person at the station, right? We at Tulip, like the way we think of our digital stations is, we almost kind of gamify things for the worker, right? Which is, what's your day by the hour? It's not something that only the supervisor needs to see. A worker can monitor their own. Look, my standard time is I need to make 50 parts in the shift. Am I going ahead? Am I not? What part of this is taking more time? Which part is taking less time, right? So there are many plan, do, act, check cycles at the workforce level too, right? I mean, this is not
Yeah.
just at
Yeah,
the
but to add to that, I think the biggest difference is that it's based on the human, not
right.
that human interacting with the process, right? Then we're gonna see like the advantages of actually doing the gradual growth with composable approach, right? What that means
Which
is that
means,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
going back to our workstation example, right? You may start by saying, let's do pick to light first, right? Or let's start with and on, which is first, let's catch the exceptions, right? When is the station down, or when is this machine down? When is it up? Start looking at basic, downtime, right? So you may start with a downtime pilot, or you may start with digital work instructions as the first thing, right? Somewhere you get a starting point, you collect data from it, and then you take this composable approach where the way at least we want to think about it in Tulip, and it's not about Tulip, it's about the thinking, is that we think of this as Lego blocks, right? Which means you have edge connectivity, you have cloud, you have the technology that's supporting it, but you allow the freedom for the lean thinkers and the manufacturing engineers and the industrial engineers to really think of this as what are these blocks that we want to do, and maybe even change their mind, right? I mean, be flexible to say, we thought of this plan of doing this in 6 months, but now we are actually going to do digital work instructions more, right? So that ability to iterate and improve, where technology enables it, with at very low entry points in terms of cost, right? This is not going to break your bank trying to do this, right? So that's the key, right?
Yeah. A summary of what we've been conveying, right? Which is, you have a lot of new digital tools that provide no code, intuitive UI, cloud native, and edge connectivity. That's basically defining what Tulip is, right? And then you also have on the other side, you have agile development, right? Which is something that is now being it's emerging towards typical project management approach, right? Now it's more agile management, right? Iterate faster, things come from bottoms up, flexibility, and welcomes changes, right? As you progress, things change, which actually, may be introducing new technology. It might be introducing a different project that you didn't take into account at the beginning because the results in that lean cycle provided you more insights that will redirect where you're actually focused on, right? And the combination of those two give you the new perspective of like, how do I implement lean, right? I implement lean being agile and then with digital tools. And the objectives are still the same, or the goals are still the same, right? Reducing waste, avoid complexity, establish standard procedures, right? And improving on all of the above, right?
Absolutely right, Pablo. And I think we talked earlier about kind of barriers, right? Some institutional barriers in the head. Maybe part of it is people worrying about cloud. Maybe part of people thinking that, hey, I depend on my system integrator to tell me how I automate my line, right? I mean, so there is certain things in there, or maybe I try to do that, and I have an ERP module, and I'm going to try to do this with my ERP module. And there's nothing wrong with ERP modules, but in certain cases, what you have to realize today is that developing intuitive user interfaces and connecting, just plug and play, connecting a label printer or a barcode printer or a weighing scale or a torque gun, technology is there today. Whether it's Tulip or whether it's anyone else, go do your research. But you will find that this kind of edge connectivity that we talk about, where you can connect kind of all these physical devices to the worker and give them a user interface that they love, is absolutely possible, very doable. It's just taking those acronyms like MES and IoT and industry. There's nothing wrong with them inherently, but for a little bit, set them aside and just think very practically about how do I start small and what scale do I want to start. And agile is something very naturally that manufacturing engineers and industrial engineers think about, right? You think about small changes, iterate very fast, get down to the shop floor, take your laptop, go stand there and watch the worker work, start showing them the results right there, right? The way it's supposed to be, highly collaborative. And if you combine that agile thinking and lean thinking with the digital tools that are available today to make your job easier, you will get this, you will get what lean is, right? Which is, it's back to putting the worker in between, getting down to the shop floor and seeing the improvements kind of happen in front of you, right? So we are very passionate about these two aspects of kind of enabling agile thinking with technology, right?
Yeah,
And seeing the
and
results.
and our product, like what we've developed in Tulip has always been with lean manufacturing core frameworks, right? That will enable our customers practice lean as part of their day-to-day, right? And basically integrating that with lean thinking that will provide things around the results that you're expecting in a continuous improvement cycle, right?
Absolutely. I mean, the benefits are still the same, right? It either comes from quality, it comes from either reducing your cost. Definitely, safety and sustainability have become very, very important things in manufacturing today compared to many years ago. Improving asset efficiency is extremely important because there is a lot of automation going on in manufacturing, right? But you can't, if somebody puts up the slide and says, again, like I said, Industry 4.0, you adopt it and you get all of this, it's just not borne out to be true, right? You will make incremental gains in all of these, right? As you improve quality, you will start reducing your costs, right? If you improve your asset efficiency, you will again reduce cost, right? So these things are intertwined with each other. The point is, how do you start small? And actually, Pablo, there is a question, Shahrukh asks the question, to this, right? How do you map a current state of work process or an entire work system so you know where to plug in the capabilities of technology, right? So where do you start? Do you do value stream mapping, process mapping? I have a viewpoint, and maybe Pablo, you can just add after that. I think sometimes there is a little too much of something, right? Value stream mapping to the nth degree is not something we recommend. It's not necessary because today, why do you value stream map so much? I mean, you value stream map so much, then you get into a cycle of developing screens or customizing software to map to that. We invert that, right? We look at this as a very concurrent process. You start with an idea of what your process is and what you want to improve. And today, whether it's Tulip or you can definitely kind of look around in the industry, but you have very, very easy ways of bringing user interfaces and functionality to life that you process map and you stream, you then implement a change. Then you inspect the process even more with the data that you've collected. Then you make another change, right? So you do value stream mapping and process mapping, but don't kill yourself doing that so much because it's so much faster to implement and iterate with actual technology in the shop floor than doing that, right? So we want to kind of just leave with the takeaways. Pablo, you want to do it?
Yeah, for sure. So I think the first one, lean has become stagnant, and for all the many reasons that we mentioned. But now it's actually more important than ever, right? Because there's a generational shift. Turnover for employees is very high, and many other reasons, right? Automating away the human element by connecting what Industry 4.0 is, we know that is not the answer for almost everyone, but also there's a point where automation is enough, right? So that leaves it up to the human element, right? And then, like I said at the beginning, which is related to becoming stagnant, there's also a multi-generational workforce, that it's actually thinking agile, and you need to empower them with more digital lean tools so that the implementation is seamless, right? Of the lean thinking and eliminating wastes on the floor.
So with that, hopefully that at least confirmed a lot of the thinking that was there in the folks that were attending. I sometimes it can be frustrating when great ideas can't come to life quickly, but you can do it. There is technology to do it. There is really off-the-shelf technology to do it today. It's just keep that lean thinking going, right? Do we have any questions, Megan? I mean, I see a couple. I think we've answered a few, but
yeah, we've been answering a lot of the questions in real time, which is great. I think we have time for just one more question, and if there's anything else that we didn't get to, we'll definitely follow up with you personally. So this question is: my team thinks our operations are unique and are hesitant to customize off-the-shelf software from past experience. How should I approach this with my team?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think that comes from a lot of experiences with ERP and other software, right? So we are victims of our own past experiences. There's nothing wrong. The answer is that there are technologies like it actually technology provides the answer here. You don't need to customize. So that word there is the key there that makes kind of a barrier to thinking sometimes. No code is one way. I mean, in Tulip, our platform is no code. It's no code for a reason, which means we are thinking about manufacturing software as Lego blocks, right? We are thinking of, again, Pablo talked about composable architectures, right? Sometimes seeing is believing. Would love for folks to come and see, if you want to, we'd love to show you how Tulip works, but it'll go back to taking your team and showing them, there's only PowerPoints and slides and things like that only do too much, but to show them technology in action, just as a exciting, interactive session, show people how, software can be highly configurable and technology is very, very accessible to get started. So maybe part of that answer is seeing is believing, but yeah, we can show it to you, and you should do your own research around what's going on around software too, around no code. Yeah.
Great. Well, that's about all the time we have for today. Really appreciate everyone taking the time to listen to Sanjay and Pablo. You will receive a recording of this webinar, and we'll be following up with a few more lean-specific resources for you. Thanks, everyone, and thank you, Sanjay and Pablo.
Thank you.